What if your stories, which includes your values, gets passed on to the people that you love? I'd like to welcome Laing Rikkers to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely day. Welcome, Laing.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
It is my pleasure to host you, and I believe you're joining from San Diego in California in the United States of America.
That's true. I
Yeah,
am.
wonderful, wonderful. Well, why don't we jump into an icebreaker to begin with, and then we'll transition over to what it is that you have faced and processed, and you've also written a book about it. So, would you like to share an icebreaker at all, personally, professionally? Where would you like to start our listeners and viewers off today?
Wow. I am, first of all, a mother. I've been married for 25 years. I spent most of my professional career working in private equity and invested in medical device companies. I have since left the day-to-day corporate world in that regard, and now I do executive coaching and some grief counseling, and I'm spending a lot of time right now on my new book, which is called Morning Leaves: Cultivating a Life of Beauty, Meaning, and Joy. And so we'll be spending a lot of time this year out in the world talking to people about that and some of the lessons that I've learned that I hope people can benefit from.
Yeah, I think that your story is amazing in the sense that we always plan for success and you have experienced success. And I think that's where I'd like to start out today's episode with regarding, many high achievers. You graduated from Harvard, which is an amazing accomplishment. Not everyone has done that. And I also joked with you in our preamble, our icebreaker, that my grandfather went to Harvard and it was originally just for males. And so kudos to you. So here you are, and you're on this path of absolute success. And then challenges come into your world,
Yeah,
unexpected challenges. And I think about how oftentimes successful individuals, it's not that they live in a bubble that does not include problems. Absolutely, their life includes problems, and they will have many skill sets to process them. But at the same time, sometimes it can blindside them. And I thought to myself, okay, if we rarely pause to think about how we can handle tragedy when it shows up, then how do we handle it? Or does it just stop the design of our legacy and then we fall into avoidance, procrastination, or just, what I mentioned to you in the preamble, under PTSD, do we just flight? Do we fly away?
sure.
Do we escape our lives and what it is that is the hardest? So tell me what you have faced if you'd like to share it, and then how did you handle it?
Sure. Well, I faced a whole host of different kinds of um, challenges, I think probably like lots of your listeners. One that happened in 2007 was our house burned down in a wildfire. And then probably most startlingly, I lost my younger sister very unexpectedly in 2019. She died in atrial fibrillation, and that was shocking and traumatic and really turned my world upside down. So I've had a number and had business challenges. I've had, a number of different kinds of challenges, and they each ask something a little bit different of you. But I think the more you get through different things, the more you learn, and the easier it is to weather the next things that come along.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things with legacy is that we can oftentimes think of our own personal legacy in terms of accomplishments, and there is an element of that. But there's
Sure.
another element where we do get blindsided by life's tragedies. And so, in our preamble, you had mentioned about your sister having sleep apnea, and this particular your younger sister. So you may have felt protective over her, and you
Sure.
couldn't solve it. You couldn't. It wasn't like you could write the great paper and turn it in for an A plus. It was something that was unexpected, and it's not something that necessarily we talk about in regular day conversation. If I used to have an English bulldog, and the bulldogs struggled with sleep apnea, but it was like one day she just wasn't here anymore, and so,
Yeah. Well, and with my sister, there was a particular irony in that situation in that I had co-founded a business that made devices for patients that were suffering from obstructive sleep apnea. It was a company, or it is a company called Prosomnus Sleep Technologies. And, that company has treated hundreds of thousands of patients very successfully. And because of that, I was very aware of the signs and symptoms of sleep apnea. And she had really all of them. She was snoring loudly, needing to be in her own room. She had a lot of daytime sleepiness. She needed to take a nap every day. She was suffering from some depression. A lot of these are very consistent with people who have sleep apnea. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't think of women with sleep apnea, and they certainly don't think of younger people with sleep apnea. And so, despite having sent her the name of a specialist right near her and said that we would give her a device if she needed one, she was very supportive of the business. She was an investor in the business, but she was never tested, and unfortunately, it did a lot of damage to her heart. We found out afterwards that she had an enlarged heart, and she died very suddenly in atrial fibrillation. I mean, that was a very extreme case of someone having sleep apnea, um, but it was the irony for me in particular that I was spending so much of my time and energy in trying to help solve and address this, very ubiquitous medical condition, and to have it impact our family so seriously was a really hard thing to deal with. So, now I do spend a fair amount of my time trying to educate people about the signs and symptoms. It's such a common condition. There are estimated to be 1 billion people globally, so it's about um, one in 20 people who have. Sorry, that's not right. 1 in 5 people, 20% of people are estimated to have sleep apnea, and only about 20% are currently diagnosed and treated. So we've got this enormous undiagnosed population out there of people whose quality of life and length of life is being impacted by this condition, and they just aren't even aware of it. So trying to educate the medical community, patients, that sort of thing, so they can take care of themselves and so that people can take care of their loved ones. A lot of times the person who has it doesn't even realize that they do. It's really their bed partners or the people around them who recognize the symptoms. So it was a really difficult thing to face. And so we now move on and do what we can to help other people.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that you're raising awareness.
Yeah,
Yeah, as a
trying to.
part, yeah, as a part of your own legacy. And I think a part of the conversation is also how, as a society, and I know you've written a book and we're going to talk about in that one moment, but how as a society do we process grief if we choose to process it at all? I think your book is called Mourning Leaves.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And one of the things that you had shared with me in our preamble was that it's won 5 awards, and that's wonderful. And having said that, that you wanted to look at it through a lens of cultivating a life of joy, that you didn't want to just um, stay in a place of acknowledging the grief, but also realizing that we can choose joy. And I thought to myself, how interesting is that? Because one of the things that I also had talked with you about in the preamble was I had a great grandfather on my father's side of the family, and it was about a century ago. He was a very successful insurance broker up in New England, and his first son had passed away early. His first son was a physician, which then had a ripple effect onto my grandfather, because then what happens is there's this shock that happens of, oh, well, if we only have one child left, we're going to become the helicopter parent and make sure nothing happens to that child, even if that child is an adult, a fully grown adult with a family and children, etc. And so it changes the dynamics. And one of the questions that came up for me that I obviously have not been able to ask my great grandfather, because he's passed away, we're talking over a century ago, like before the Spanish flu era, is how did he process it, if he did process it at all? And nothing was written down. Nothing was written down about his business success, but also nothing was written down regarding how did he process this in life. Because
Yeah.
we're talking about someone during the Great Depression that had multiple homes, multiple Cadillacs, a boat, a maid, etc., living the good life, and then the unexpected happens. And so then how do you process that grief? And I think part of it is shining a light on the ability of, like, if you have processed it, what is it that I can learn from you?
Yeah. Well, I think that as you're pointing out, I think that the role of story is so critical in our legacy. And, you know, you're curious what happened with them. And part of writing my book was ensuring that my children had a sense of what I had gone through and what I had learned. And so I had started writing and sort of putting it together, thinking that it would just be a record for them. And then it continued to evolve, and I realized a lot of what I had written about was more universal than that, and ultimately it became a book. But I think that that idea for everybody, whether it's turns into a book or just a family legacy, that um, what we've gone through, the values that we have as a result of it, the lessons learned, um, those are the things that create the days of our lives and create our lives, and what we want to pass on, and ideally make things better for the next generation and those thereafter. And as we see, history can repeat itself, and and so the more that we can maximize the good things and minimize the trauma and the tragedy that everyone is going to face at some point, the better.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is wisdom. And so a part of it
Yes, yes.
is the victory stories of we did well and we accomplished great milestones, and the wisdom of, and then they showed up on our doorstep and here's how we addressed it.
Right.
Because there's, gosh, many individuals, wealth advisors in particular, will talk about 5 forms of capital, but I think there's more than that, and that can include emotional capital and intellectual capital, human capital, et cetera, and so
Sure.
forth. And I know that you had spoken, and we had talked about this in the preamble, that you had spoken to about 12 CEOs, and you had said, misfortune is coming, be prepared. And I think that that is brilliant in terms of it's not just expecting that CEOs will have all the answers, or that preparation will meet the opportunity when it does arrive on their doorstep. Like, you handle it, you're the leader.
Yeah.
But there's something I think in all of our lives, like when you had spoken about that we are going to be tested, that if we didn't figure it out before, it kind of shows up in the next generation. And so if you can pass on some tools, then how wise is that, so that the next generation can know, okay, my mom handled this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I describe it like the weather, right? It's coming. Something's coming. I mean, life is not rosy every day, for anyone's life. And so how can you be resilient, and how can you, you know, anticipate um the strength that you're going to need, and how to stay balanced and level-headed, and you don't know what it is, so you can't fully prepare, but um, you can have good practices in your life of caring for yourself, so that when it does hit, you're not completely tipped over, and then you can also be in the position not just to take care of yourself, but the people around you, and to help your loved ones or your community, or depending on your role, sort of what your circle of influence is. So I think it's really important, and it was great to get to speak with these women, to young women CEOs who have so much potential, and to be able to help them think through their own resilience. I was very fortunate to get to do that.
Yeah. So in one of your prior podcasts, you did speak about that you wanted your children to know you. And you talked
Mhm.
about, walk it, talk it, write it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to circle back to a question of why do you think legacy includes looking at all aspects in the conversations we have with one another, as well as what it is that we process internally. And I realize I'm circling the wagons, but this is where we get to go deeper beyond taxes and financial capital.
Yeah. Well, I think that, at least when I think about the kinds of questions that I have for the people who are no longer with us, like you have for your grandfather, I have for my grandparents or my great grandparents, and the more that we know about our past and the history of our family, I do think that, certain traumas, are intergenerational. And so I think the more we can understand those things, the more we can understand what the people who influenced us were influenced by. I think
Mhm.
the better we can understand ourselves, and the more we understand ourselves, the better we are to, manage our ups and downs, and know where we need the help we need to get. And hopefully we can, for the next generations, not pass on some of the negative things that have potentially impacted prior generations. And so I think it's essential. I think it's more important ultimately than passing on money, is to be passing on good sense, and and a balanced heart and sensibility. And I mean, obviously having other kinds of resources are fabulous too, um, but you see lots of people who have lots of wealth, but no tranquility, and that's
Mm.
like a great gift in the end. So, um,
Yeah.
I do think it's really very important.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because you're absolutely right. An individual can have privilege. They can have a wonderful, luxurious lifestyle, but you don't know what's eating them on the inside, and that they may be too afraid to ask of how do I go from point A to point B. And I think that's why our chatting about this today and your willingness to break it down is so
Yeah.
important. It's like a breath of fresh air. So let me move on to the next question, which is that grief and challenges are going to touch every family, and yet they're often repressed because we don't know how to deal with them. We don't have the tools. There's not the space of safety, etc., to be able to make it to the other side. And one of the things I also chatted with you in the preamble was about the concept of process coaching, which is a coactive coaching term. But for any of the
Yeah.
listeners out there that don't know, it just means that you make it out the other side by having the tough, honest, often difficult conversations, but you're better for it if you can show up and learn and make some type of progress regarding new learnings or distinctions. So how does your book address the subject both visually as well as in words?
Sure. So, well, I'll maybe start by saying, so my book, I had an initial edition of my book that came out in 2023, and that also was called Morning Leaves, but the subtitle of that was Reflections on Loss, Grief, and Connection. The second edition of my book is same title, Morning Leaves, but it's Cultivating a Life of Beauty, Meaning, and Joy. And what I love about that is the shift from just focusing on the loss to focusing on the fact that we move beyond loss and grief, and that we have, it takes courage, it takes work, and I'm not minimizing it by any stretch, but we have the choice of joy and choice of seeing beauty, and ultimately finding meaning in our lives. And I think that there are some very practical things that we can do that help us to take care of ourselves. And um, in the first edition, I talked I had three things that I talked about, which was talk it, walk it, write it. And that meant that I think it's really critical if you're going through a difficult time to find someone to talk it out with. I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful grief counselor who allowed me to process the wide array of emotions that I was dealing with. It was shock, it was trauma, it was loss, it was anger, it was all of the things that come with a big unexpected loss. But I think that, had I not had her, being able to just talk to somebody who would listen and help make sense of what I was going through, um, would have been equally helpful. And so I think for people to find someone to talk about and not repress it, not keep it silent, not sweep it under the rug, because the rug is only so big. It's going to come out. And so I personally believe that if you're going through something difficult, you're better off going through the middle of it. And it's tough to do that, but the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So I think if you're really hoping to get through it, go through the middle of it. So talk it. The next one is walk it, which I meant that one should exercise, move the energy. It actually physically can get trapped inside of you. And, when you hear about people having physical manifestations from stress, ulcers or other headaches, different kinds of places where in your body that kind of stress and grief can get stuck. I think exercise is really critical. And if you can walk in nature, all the better. I think that, as we all know from Walt Whitman and others, nature, revitalizes it, shows us the full cycle of life, that things come and go, and it helps with perspective. And then the final thing that I wrote about in the first edition was write it. And by that, I meant to do something creative. In my case, it was literally writing. I think journaling is very, very helpful. I journaled every morning, and I was inspired by Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, which is a phenomenal book if you haven't checked it out. But taking what you have inside emotionally that you're grappling with, rolling it around, taking control of it, and then redirecting that energy and through creativity into something else is a really powerful way to work through it and to heal. And there's a lot of research that shows that you know, doing artistic and creative things is scientifically proven to help you heal faster. So those were the three things in my first book. I added on a couple of things in the second edition that I thought were important to add, the importance of getting enough rest and sleep. And when you feel terrible, to really be looking at your sleep habits and make sure that you're not fighting against yourself in that way. Eating properly, which also means not eating bad things. So putting good things in and not putting in either bad food or including, drugs, alcohol, other things that numb. And it's very tempting when you're in a lot of pain to try to numb out. And, back to my, quickest way through something is a straight line. And, if you're numbing yourself, you're making the line longer. And so I suggest against that. And then steep, so eat, sleep, steep meaning really leaning into meditation, spirituality, centeredness. If you're religious, your religious practices, but um, taking the time to make space and sit in the present with something bigger than yourself and your own immediate problems is really helpful. And then the last thing is pay it forward. That ultimately, when you don't feel good or you're not happy, to do something for somebody else is a gift that gives right back to you. And, it helps, provide meaning and context um, and the generosity and perspective that one gets from being able to do things. I'm involved with an organization called Feeding San Diego, and that's really meaningful for me to be able to sort of get outside of myself and know that I'm helping people who, are maybe less fortunate in certain ways. So those are the things that I touch on in the book. And, I think they're very practical and they're all essentially free and available to everybody. And they're easy to forget. I think, they're kind of motherhood and apple pie at some level. And yet, even though we know we should do things, a lot of times we forget or we get off track. And so I
Well,
hope
we
that
choose the easy way out. Like,
yeah,
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 I,
I
I think
agree.
I think Brene Brown on her TEDx talk spoke about how we're one of the most medicated societies today,
Yeah.
and
It's easier to take
choosing,
a pill. Yeah. And
yeah,
just,
our form of escape. And so I appreciate that you spoke about the line from A to B just gets longer if somebody chooses to numb out or escape compared to doing the work of processing it and
yeah. It is, yeah, it's some of it is that's why, I said earlier that, it takes courage and it takes real work to get through this sort of a thing. It's very doable and everybody has the tools, but you do have to get you have to roll up your sleeves and you got to do the work. And it does require some bravery. It's sometimes it's really hard and it can be feel very lonely and very difficult. And yet the other side is, this opportunity to really see the life that you have and how much beauty there is um and 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 have a very earned sense of joy. Like I talk a little bit about the difference between happiness, which I sort of think of as sort of sparkly um, and ephemeral, whereas I think joy is much closer to sort of peace and tranquility and sort of that deeper um, sense of really knowing what's most important and um, having sort of swept away some of the other distractions that we have in sort of modern life and focusing on the things that are of sort of ultimate consequence.
yeah, I was going to ask you about both joy and beauty. What is beautiful to you today?
Oh, well, I'm a huge nature fan. I like to be outdoors. I like to, it's just this morning walked on the beach. I like to be able to, see the sky. I like to, you know, various animals, the waves, the, cloud formations, all of that. So, but I love art. I like to, on my Instagram, I like to post, I have something I call Floral Friday where I identify an artist and post some of their work and it forces me to slow down and pay attention and connect with other artists and deliberately seek beauty because John O'Donohue wrote a whole book on beauty and how that is really in his view the key to being sort of deeply joyful is to be able to identify and find beauty because it gives us hope.
Absolutely. I enabled screen sharing. So if you'd like to share any of the pages of your book in PDF, you're welcome to, but you don't have to. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh,
Okay.
that's so nice. Well, here I can, I don't have them pulled up right now, but I can show you. So this is the cover of the current edition of my book. And I worked with this incredible artist named Kelly Lee Ratting, and she did about 80 original paintings. I'm not doing this very well, for the book. And they're just stunning. And she did such a lovely job. And I think the combination of visual and text is is part of what makes this book special is it's got some narrative, which is the story. It's got some poetry, which are all pretty short. They tend to be um, really about something that I was processing as I was moving through grief. Not some of them are explicitly about grief, but some of them are really about other emotions that were sort of bubbling up about what was important to me and what I was struggling with at the time or just looking at. And then you've got the art. And so I think particularly for people who are going through a difficult time, sometimes very text heavy books are daunting. I know that when my sister died, people gave me big stacks of books and I just couldn't read. I would read a paragraph and I'm like, I don't know what that said. And I'd reread it and it's not computing. And so I just put them all down. I couldn't, whereas I could look at pictures, or I could read something that was very brief. And so, um,
I think that's when you spoke about baby steps.
yeah, 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 sometimes you just need to, um, emerge and everybody goes through it differently, right? Their grieving process is very unique. It depends on everything about their context and who they are and how they, you know, approach different things in their lives. So it's been interesting with my book because when I wrote it, I thought of it as sort of an A to Z. Like I would, every time I read it, I sat down and I read the entire thing back to front. It's not that long, so you could sit down and in, 20, 25 minutes, read the whole thing cover to cover. But interestingly, readers tell me that they leave it at their bedside and they use it much more as a meditation. And so there are about 35 poems, and people say that they'll open it up and read one either first thing in the morning or when before they go to bed, and sometimes they'll journal about it. And I love that it has sort of taken on its own life and it's being utilized by people in ways that make sense to them and their situation. So it's this book has had its own life all along, and so it's been sort of an interesting thing to experience from I feel like I've just sort of shepherded it. It has its own thing going.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's beautiful that it's been an artistic tool and release to be able to go from, like you had said, point A to point B, and also because you've done the journey, you can invite others as a guide to know that they can not stay frozen like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up kind of a contrast for a moment. If somebody thinks of legacy as achievement or taxes or just financial capital, if I draw a contrast for a moment to intention, influence, and values, was there a turning point that then shifted your focus to look at legacy beyond just achievement to expand upon meaning? Or did you always consider meaning
Um,
regarding the invisible
uh,
things?
yeah, I think sort of yes, and I think that I grew up in New York City in the 80s in the sort of high flying 80s and was surrounded by a lot of people with a lot of money, and not everybody was very happy.
Mm.
And so I never associated um, sort of money and achievement with being happy. Um, and I mean, or I, not that they couldn't coexist, but that they were not determinant of one another.
There's
Just
no
because,
guarantee.
yes. And so, so I think I was always looking for something bigger, something else that, and so there was sort of that thread, but I didn't, um, I didn't have all the answers certainly, and I don't, I don't know that any of us have all the answers, um, but but certainly when I lost my sister, that, I mean, any question that was left about, you know, money stuff, legacy in that regard was like, okay, well, yes, that's nice. I don't mean that it isn't by any stretch. It certainly makes life a lot easier. But, um, she had a 9-year-old daughter, and, that child didn't have her mom. And, what did a child like that need? She needed some resources, but she also needed guidance. She needed values. She needed other kinds of support. And so it made me very aware of what I wanted to make sure that my children knew, what my children, the kinds of support systems that they had around them, um, and to make sure that they had the kind of values and lessons that I wanted to be sure that I had passed on. So yeah, so it's, you know, we're all on this journey of our own, but that certainly was a pretty rude awakening to what really matters, I guess.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think when somebody has that void, it feels like somebody yanked the carpet out from underneath them. That
Yeah.
we think that there's going to be certain guarantees or certain things are always going to be present in a sense of security. And then our world gets turned upside down, and we wonder in that moment what's real or what can I know is going to be there tomorrow. It's almost like we're stepping on lily pads, and we don't want our foot to fall through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. It's all very delicate, and things can change in a second, right? And we can, be as organized and planned and buttoned up as we want to be, and the universe has other plans sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to circle the wagons for a moment. So let's say that there's somebody and they're stuck in loss.
Mm.
What would you say to them, given that you've transformed or are still transforming grief into purpose and service?
Yeah, I mean, I would go, I mean, I always tell people to go back to the basics. I mean, I would start with the sort of walk it, talk it, write it. I would start with, you know, I changing your environment. I mean, just getting up, physically moving, getting
Mm.
outside. It really can shift your perspective quite significantly. And then, finding somebody who you can, talk to about it, to sort of get out of your own head and get somebody else's perspective, and to not feel alone. I mean, all of our losses are unique to us, and yet we don't want to feel alone. And so I think to connect with somebody else is really important. And then do something fun. I mean, if you can, that there is an organization that comes out of the Harvard School of Public Health called the Foundation for Art and Healing. And the the theory that they talk about is that if you can do something artistic, you can get into a flow state. And I certainly found that when I was writing, I would just sort of disappear. And it's very calming, and it allows you to relax a part of your brain and your spirit, I think. And then when you've finished your, creation, you have what they call an artifact. You have something to show. I have a poem to share with you. Someone has a painting. Um, and in sharing it, you create a connection, and the connection is really important for us humans. We are social creatures. And so that whole process of going through the flow, of having something that where we've channeled the energy into this thing, and then to be able to share it and connect over it and talk about it, um, is a very scientifically proven method for helping us heal. So I think that that's a good place to start. And it can be something really simple. I mean, it could be a piece of paper and a pencil and writing, or it can be a box of pastels and a blank sheet of paper and draw, or knit, or dance. I mean, I think it can be really any form of artistic expression.
Yeah, I'm almost thinking in the back of my mind if I should title this podcast episode "Talk It, Walk It, Write It."
Well, that would be apt.
Well, because sometimes the simplest will reach someone, particularly in their subconscious. When you had spoken a moment ago about sometimes you could just read a paragraph, even when individuals who care deeply brought you whole books and stacks of books, and you're like, I just need something simple right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think one of the things. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, would it be interesting to read one of the poems I hadn't
Yes,
planned
please,
it, but
please. Yeah, absolutely. You have the floor, and
for some reason this one is speaking to me this morning. So this is called Cactus. This is the painting. Um, so today a cactus, the kind you see in westerns, big, spiky, majestic, yet inside quite lonely, alone. Thorns on the outside to shield and to right, sorry, thorns on the outside to shield the soft flesh within. Guarded, buffered, distracting to ensure that you don't see the ache. But it's there, inside the tall stalk and into the big arms, in the beating sun and the clear, cold nights, by itself, occasionally putting out a beautiful flower to invite a bluebird to come sit on its shoulder, to be together for a bit.
oh, I think that'll be the 58-second clip for Instagram or Facebook. That's
Oh,
just so authentic. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that there's something about the grieving process that is both very lonely and something we have to go through. We have to walk the walk ourselves, and yet we do need to put out the flower and invite people in and connect too if we really want to try to get to the other side. So that's just an example of poems. They touch on a lot of different subjects, but it was
Yeah,
fun.
and I think it's also your presence going into the world of someone else and being with them, not how oftentimes in society we will pat someone on the back and say, get over it. Or we'll pat them on the back and want them to just heal within 3 minutes.
Mm,
And sometimes it is that journey that you spoke of that we don't know how it's affected, like you had said, even in the somatic sense of like their nervous system. That I think the technical terms are the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, but it's very real of that mind body connection of what they're carrying around. And you could
yeah.
say, if you feel like a cactus today,
Mm,
it's okay if you feel like a cactus. You're
yeah.
not alone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you can feel one way, you could feel that way today, not feel it tomorrow, and then feel it again. I mean, all of these things, they sort of weave in and weave out, and there's so many layers to each of us. And so yeah, I mean, a lot of the poems are really getting at the various experiences that I had of grief, like lonely. Most people, I don't think, oh, you're grieving, you're lonely, but I was. I think a
Because
lot
you
of
don't want to put the burden on someone else of I'm here again today feeling
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
the color periwinkle. I'm feeling blue today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to get to put this book together and share it with the world. It's been a great gift to me. So,
Yeah. And now you get to expand the circle and extend the invitation to other individuals. Yeah. Again, I go back to what Brene Brown hit upon in that thread or the social nerve right now of that I don't even think we know how to grieve as a nation, separate from anything that's political. I'm just speaking about that there's 1,000 flavors to escape. And the more access that one has to resources, the more that they can escape compared to walking through that journey that they need to walk through or the accountability um, to just not escape and to
Yeah,
come out the other side and feel whatever it is that they need to feel because they'll be better for it.
I completely agree. Well, and the second edition of the book, the preface opens up this whole notion of loss above and beyond a death loss. And I actually would have maybe I'll read that. I actually have it. I haven't have it right in front of me because I was just
Please,
looking at
please
my
read it
editor.
because you never know who's listening or
Yeah.
watching.
So, but my editor and I had this notion of sort of opening the aperture because there is so much loss right now, and there are so many people who are grieving in different ways, and we're collectively grieving. And so this is the opening. Loss takes many forms. Some are quiet and woven into daily life. Others arrive without warning and leave us forever changed. A death, the end of a relationship, an unattainable dream, a shift in identity, the shared grief we carry for our planet, our politics, and the uncertain shape of our future, all that we carry in our bloodlines. Some losses linger under the surface, others stop us in our tracks. Each brings its own kind of grief, personal, complex, and ever changing. It may come as sorrow or anger, numbness or insight. There is no single way to grieve. Yet, in every form, grief holds the same human need to be seen, to be heard, to feel understood, to know we are not alone. Mourning leaves us an invitation, a space for reflection, integration, and the recognition that loss changes us. It holds up a mirror and allows us to see ourselves in new ways. Within these pages of poetry and art, you might find echoes of your own journey. May they offer you solace, insight, and comfort. And if beyond your grief you long for joy, a radiant sense of clarity, strength, and hope, I understand. I search for it too. Happiness may shimmer and vanish, but true joy asks more of us: presence, practice, and courage. Come, let us walk through the trees. I'll tell you my story.
Oh, it's lovely. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So it's, I'm hoping that it speaks to people and, sort of says, yeah, we're sort of all in this together. I mean, there's so much division, and yet we all are humans and we're all going through so much of the
Yeah.
same stuff. So it's yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think it also it gives permission to feel. And you're absolutely right. Let's just turn off the television news for one night and maybe read a book about homes. Okay. Let me ask you about what does the word legacy mean to you personally? There's the definition in the dictionary, there's the etymology, but in one or two sentences, what does legacy mean to you personally?
Mm. I guess leaving behind what truly matters.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think it's what it, and how you've touched people.
Very nice. I just wanted to write it down. Thank you. Thank you. And what would you like your legacy to be? Your holistic legacy. I
Hmm.
know that that's a question I bring up sometimes that I wish that when we go and we get our cup of coffee at Starbucks, they write our name and it's so personal on the coffee cup. And, thank you for visiting our store. And it's so Lang, here's your macchiato, whatever, right? And yet what if they wrote the question of what would you like your legacy to be? It warrants that the answer matters.
Yeah. Um, I think that I guess I'd like my legacy that I left things better than I found them.
Mm, mm,
And,
right.
there are a lot of different ways in which you try to make the world better. Be it either emotionally or, physically by, you know, leaving the earth in a better space, or the relationships that I have, all of those ways. But
Our
doing my
hearts.
yeah, our hearts, our, the people in our communities, that sort of thing.
Yeah. For someone who's listening and they're thinking about their life legacy, particularly if they have experienced achievement and success. And if they're thinking of their legacy in terms of just quantitative assets, what would you say to them about the value of going deeper and sharing who they are and that vulnerability as well as perhaps who they be and
Mhm.
aspirational values?
Well, I think for each person it's going to be different. I would, for each of them, start with questions about what do they wish that they had been left from the people, in their lives, and what can they learn from that? And, is there something that they might shift or do more of or pay attention to while they have time?
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. Thank you. Is it okay if we go over a couple of minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, very cool. I just want to be aware. Okay, very nice. Okay, so I want to talk about steps forward as well as tangible practices because oftentimes we can design a legacy, but then do we revisit it once a year? Are we willing to even have family meetings? I know you're within a family unit. Half of America happens to be single, but I still think that they can design a legacy, that they don't need to be left out of the conversation. They too grieve and have wisdom to pass forward and to
Sure.
transfer. Are there any intentional practices that help you stay aligned? I think you had mentioned talking with a grief counselor, uh, taking walks in nature. Are there any other intentional practices?
I learned something from Tony Robbins, gosh, I don't know, a dozen years ago. But I've really stuck with it. I think because it must really help me. I every morning before I open my eyes and before I, say good morning to my husband or anything, I um, think about three things that I'm grateful for.
Mm.
And I know that there's, sort of a lot of talk about gratitude these days, but it he says that you can't be afraid while you are being grateful. And there is something about really sort of sinking into my body and thinking about what am I really great. And sometimes it's really silly things, It's like I'm really, I'm really grateful that that my dog is right here, or I'm really grateful. It doesn't have to be, big life momentous things. It could be I'm really glad that it looks like it's a sunny day today, or but where it might be something more profound about, my family or something else, or about health or whatever it might be. But I think that starting the day by really um, thinking out a little bit bigger, a little bit outside of oneself, and sort of connecting with big ideas. Then physically, he also talks about like getting back into your body. And I think of like sort of Peter Pan putting on his little outfit, like, okay, I need to like get into my body and then, sort of setting an intention for the day. And, all of that takes me 2 minutes. It's nothing, but it helps and it keeps me focused. And otherwise, what do? You grab your phone or you start chattering about logistics. It's very easy to get sucked into the momentum of the day, but to just take a few minutes for yourself to really think about what matters and launch your day from there, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer very much. Absolutely. We can all of a sudden transition to scrolling and swiping on the
Oh,
smartphones.
the temptation is just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also bring that up because sometimes and I'm going to switch over to the relevant section in a moment as a part of our conversation today, I think about how easy it is for someone to numb out. And then it's like, what are they just waiting to die? I'm being a little crude right there, but I'm also being very honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like what we were talking about with pills. I mean, I think that there is so much pain and that we humans do what we need to do to, get our dopamine hits and try to numb out as best we can because um it's hard. I mean, my husband and I say all the time, like, it's really hard to be human. I mean,
To
it,
feel, to choose to feel.
yeah.
Mm,
And that it's when we really open our eyes and really look at what we're dealing with, it's challenging. It's a big deal. And yet, the numbing out doesn't really address any of the core problems, right? I mean, it like we
sure.
said, it pushes them away, it postpones them. And um, with my rug analogy, it's like you're just sweeping them under the rug and they're going to come back. And then they come back, double fold because they've had some time to grow and fester and build up. And then it can get really overwhelming. Whereas, I like the analogy of like a river. It's like if, it's filling up with, sort of silt and little stones and bigger, but if you can keep the river open and you can keep pulling those things out, the flow is very natural and open and moves forward. But if you let it get clogged up and if you ignore that it's building up, it starts to choke and flood, and then you're in trouble and a much harder mess to get out of.
Yeah. Let's do the work now compared to
Yeah,
procrastinating it. Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting. I think design and legacy also reminds us that we are mortal. And Madison Avenue is going to tell us that we're going to live forever. And every shiny symbol is, the shiny object and the latest fashion trend and all of it. It's so that transitions us to the next question that if, or how can we then shift from a self-focused success to a values driven legacy in a world that values materialism, profit and commerce, etc.
Well, I think that that's where it comes back to making the choice, right?
Okay.
It has to be a conscious decision that it's something that you want. It's very easy to get pulled into, all of the
Messages.
shiny objects and to like I said, I think to lean into, you know, whatever one's, uh larger spiritual practices are. I think that
Mhm.
that is important. I think I mean, and whether or not one is religious or not, I think that most people are still spiritual at some level, and to ask themselves of what is really of ultimate consequence, what really is going to matter, and are those shoes going to really matter? Is you're being a member of some club, is that going to matter in the big sense of things? And um, you know, are you going to Mary Oliver's, your one precious life, like are you doing something important with it and meaningful, and when your time comes, and who knows when it's coming, um will you be proud that that's what you did with it?
Yeah, yeah, and especially with peace of mind.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that, to die with no regrets of some, I mean, I don't know that anybody really dies with no regrets, but to get as close as you can, right? And so, um, that's, and those are just dated, those are small choices every day, right? I mean, do you pick up your phone and scroll, or do you go for a walk, or do you, go volunteer and help somebody else out, or do you call someone and check in on them, or, how do you choose, what is it Annie Diller says, like, how you spend your days is how you spend your life,
Mm,
and so these are small incremental choices that we each get to make all the time, and so we have to do the best we can.
yeah, absolutely. I oftentimes speak about, I'm just writing down what you said, how you spend your days and how you spend your life. I often
You should check that. She's much more eloquent than I am. I maybe botched it a little bit, but that's what she meant.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Sometimes I think of like the three or four legs of a chair, and so the chairs are legacy vision, and those three or four legs are values. What do you think are your top three or four core values?
Hmm. Um, Integrity.
Mm.
Um, let's see, self-care. Being um, uh, responsible. Being transparent, and yeah, I think those are the big ones. And maybe being loving. You know,
Yeah,
going first, um, trying to share when I can.
yeah. Well, I think it's aspirational. I spoke to you about positive role models and the need for them in society to lead the way forward, so we can think about our life legacy, and it's not just the article in the newspaper or the little section at the back of the paper. It's bigger than that. It's what gets passed forward in all different types of capital, and it's also what I don't know how your parents influenced you to then say that you want your children to know you, but I think that is the fabric of society and how we connect in those roots, and also modeling this is how we handle life when life shows up. All right. So, final question before you share any websites about your book and so forth. If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month for the next year to design your legacy's hardcover coffee table book, what pictures and stories would fill its pages about your life, your family's life, etc.?
Well, of course, I've kind of had the opportunity with Morning Leaves to I've had a first run at that,
Okay. Okay.
and so that's um, that's probably the first thing that I would say is I've had the opportunity to sort of take a crack at that. Um, I would like to do more, and I think that I will probably do more. And I'd like to share more art. I'd like to write more poetry. I'd like to um, pull together more of the lessons that I've learned that I think are of value and share them both with my kids and then hopefully more broadly if they seem universal and appropriate. So it's been a nice way for me to share, to be able to both have a narrative, have a story, but also all of the poetry that I write is metaphorical as you heard in that cactus poem, sort of open enough for me to be saying something that's both very personal, but also leaves enough space for you to write your own story in it as well. And I like to be able to connect with people in that way.
Yeah. Thank you. What is a good website?
So it's my first and last name. So langrikkers.com. And that has links to buying my book, to um, my LinkedIn page, which is also Laing Rikkers. And then my Instagram, which I post on pretty much every day, is morning underscore leaves underscore and underscore poetry. So it's a little bit long, morning leaves and poetry. So I welcome anyone to follow along and appreciate, all of the support.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to thank you. We started out today's conversation with the intention of what if your stories, which includes your values, gets passed on to the people you love in the design of your legacy, because I think that that is a business promise we have fulfilled today. And again, sometimes people don't know where to start, especially if they've come to a crossroads of grief. It's like, okay, well, if that was the inciting event, now where do we go? And I think that you've laid some very good breadcrumbs to figure out how do we go from A to B. And so some of the highlights, I just wanted to touch upon them for a moment, was that you can look at these moments um, through joy as well as beauty. That where you are today isn't necessarily where you're going to stay. It could just be a catalyst, but also realizing that the book that you have published is a self-care kind of book, and that misfortune comes for all of us. It's coming. It doesn't matter if uh, what type of social economic level we're at. It's going to come, and we should be prepared. And you've spoken about walk it, talk it, write it, but you also spoke about sleep, eat, sleep, paying it forward. And I think in your own life, you've also shared with me that luck plays a part. And you may have not ever thought you would have written a book or saw yourself as a writer. And some of it is the surprises that come in life and the courage that we have to rise to those occasions and to do the real work. Because if 1 billion people, or 1 out of 5, 20%, that this is a reality, then this is an important conversation that we've had today, so that someone who's listening can say, okay, I'm not the only one, even if I don't know who else has experienced it. So thank you for being a guest today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's really enjoyable.
Yeah, it's been a joy to be a witness to your conversation, but also to hear your insights. One of the things is I'm always learning. Just when I think I know everything about how to design or plan a legacy, I get blown out of the water. But that's that's the joy of the growth mindset, that once we learn something, gosh, there's more yards on the football field to keep going. So, okay, well, I will close this out by saying that if anyone is tuning in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Today, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your friends and family. And if you feel so inclined, send an email to either Lang or myself and let us know your thoughts and feelings about today's conversation, because it is very real and it's more than just taxes and financial capital. And so thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Lang, for speaking into your legacy.
Thank you. Great to be here.